the analogy I love is we have discovered a brand new continent of English speaking PhDs that will work for close to free. Okay, boom, we're live. Okay, hi.
Hey, Raj.
We've kind of gone back and forth on this episode, which is a little different than sort of what we expected to talk about. Let's call it a year ago, when we were sort of discussing the idea of coming on and having a discussion. A lot of that is just sort of germinated, I think, from the last 6 months of us talking back and forth every couple of weeks about just AI. Like, I don't think we have spent a single substantive discussion talking about business development on oil and gas, which is probably the primary thing we've spent time on before, or CCS, or whatever, like sort of novel energy, finance, or business development idea. I think it has all been dominated by either using AI tools or building AI tools. And so I think it made a lot of sense to have a 1 hour podcast, or whatever this looks like, to talk through that more specifically.
Hopefully this will be helpful to people. And I put out a LinkedIn post to kind of summarize some of my thoughts of, two key things are the worst AI tool you will use is the one you're using today. They'll only keep getting better. And then you've said this in the past that essentially any of the time you're spending in and around this is essentially like you're an apprentice for your future self. You're only going to get better. It isn't necessarily the thing you did today, but it's really the learning and the cumulative knowledge of, like, if you aren't spending some time in and around developing AI skills, you're going to be unemployable in the future. And I think about this a lot. I've got, 3 18-year-olds all graduated from high school now and heading off to their respective colleges, and you're trying to coach them and guide them and where exactly they can, win in the future. There's a possibility that they won't need to work. But there's also like this second layer of like the minimum table stakes, using a gambling analogy. It's something that'll probably weave through this conversation, as I think gambling investing is kind of my background. You've got to have domain experience around some subject matter, and then you have to have some basic, prompting and prompt engineering capacity. And that's going to be the new minimum to even play the game. But what I think some of the most interesting conversations are like the ones that we've had, where you are very clearly trying to develop very specific agentic tools in a technical specialty that is energy, that is going to, I think, be the frontier of value creation. I've had conversations with other friends that are doing it in the investing world. I've had friends that have done it in kind of sell-side research of, it used to be cut and paste, put in Excel, generate research note, do that 12 times and get it done as quickly as possible, building tools to do that. I think these like agents that are in your domain specialty, if you know how to build and program and prompt around that, that's going to be, massively value creating. And I think the stuff you're doing, and I do want to prompt people to try to get into your workspace. I found it very helpful. So I'll put a plug in early on. That's, email Raj and get into the Sunya AI tools, because I think it will be something helpful for you. It's been helpful for me.
Well, I appreciate the sponsorship there. So moving back to a point you made, which is you've got kids that are going into college and sort of figuring out what does that world look like. And I've got a couple interns, and quite frankly, I spent a lot of time talking to folks that ask the exact same question, which is I either have kids in high school, they have a certain, sort of knack for certain things, but by that point, you sort of figure out what are they good at, what are they not good at, that sort of thing. What do they have some natural keen interest in, which are generally something you're good at, right? So I think those are generally aligned. And so the question is, what does that look like? And there was like some new, like I saw a Twitter post that said something like the graduating class of Harvard is like 25% like doesn't have a job coming out of undergrad, which is like, I guess, a shockingly high number relative to historical times. And part of that is probably some sort of a view of white collar workforce is at least frozen, perhaps not sort of growing, at least at this 10 seconds in time in 2025. But a lot of it just gets attributed to AI, I think, but I think there is like sort of 3 tiers of this, which we've talked about, which is in a world in which uh, young talent is supposed to always be considered cutting edge. So, like, if you sort of take the analogy that says, if you were recruiting at an investment bank, you're going to hire the kids at some point or another that were just more technically savvy in Excel and PowerPoint than you were over anybody else. Because there's enough of those sort of grads coming out, and it's very useful to you. It's like the most useful thing you can hire, right? And so I think the same analogy is true here, which is there's one tier, which is students that are graduating that have virtually no AI usage or skills or expertise. Yeah, those students probably in many ways become invisible to a lot of the desktop work that we're used to because they're just not as productive. The second phase is those that have clearly spent the last 2 or 3 years using all of those tools, which is actually counterintuitive because it could be kind of seen as cheating, right? Which is like, my university doesn't want me to use 4 or 5 of these AI tools in order to get my homework done better, faster, or whatever. Like, that's against university policy. But if you're hiring at every major consulting firm or every major investment bank, outside of dealing with compliance issues, would you not rather prefer the students who know how to use those tools very well and know how to prompt? Like, the answer is like sort of really obvious. So there's that. And then I think there's the upper echelon tier, which will only grow, which is, where are the folks that know how to string multiple AI tools together and actually sort of build the automation, right? So how can I sort of automate a task on command instead of saying, okay, great, I know how to use these tools, but the next phase is like, I know how to build these tools. I know how to get developer access to APIs, and I can effectively take a task that is manually done and just automate that. And maybe that's one tiny sliver, but those things compound, right? So you're like, you know how to automate something that's extremely rote. At some point, you know how to automate something that is far more complex. And so the way I think about it for most sort of white collar work in, let's say, the energy space specifically, but let's say even oil and gas finance, which is where you and I have spent a lot of time, if the models never got better, there's still several years of automation is probably the better way I'd frame it than, like, overcomplicating it. Like, just automation that can be built that would make everyone's lives more productive, period. Right? That would just make the organization more productive. It would make the individuals in the organization more productive. And are the things that, quite frankly, people shouldn't be doing anyway, like very rote tasks. And on a long enough time
What's
horizon.
interesting,
Yeah. Sorry, go.
no, what's interesting in that, and I've talked to people in industry, is people are busy, and I think they're not making time, and then the time spent feels like, well, I'm not getting anything out of this.
Yeah.
And so it's an
100%.
interesting, like, there's this interesting pivot point that I just want people to think about. Like, if you're not getting the results you want, change what you're doing. And like, it sounds really simple, but like, it's this like if you're doing the same thing you've always done, and you know there is a revolutionary tool that is out there, like, the defense industry is going to change dramatically, through this development. Like, you're going to see, automation, robots, drones, agentic units, driverless vehicles. Like, the rest of the world is using these tools to fundamentally change the way they work. And this was part of the point. Like, the energy industry isn't changing, and it's almost like one way to change is to go in the opposite direction of what you've been doing. Like, if you spent no time in any of these tools, spend a lot of time in it. Like, I used to say this in sales management. Like, if you're like calling people a lot and like it doesn't feel like it's making progress, well, don't call anybody. Or the opposite was frequently true. Is like, whenever the markets went bad, everybody else turtled up. So like, you go the opposite direction and make more phone calls, and you get more relationships built. And so it's just like, these new steps that you're making, like going the opposite direction, may not actually result in the change that you want, but then just like keep changing, like pivot again, and then you'll find something that works. And this is that apprenticeship view of, you're an apprentice on yourself with these agents that are available for you, that I really just think, once you find something that's working, then do more of that. And, I found it in evaluating data rooms, like, or comparing and contrasting data rooms. Like, there's some key metrics that we look at, I just upload a bunch of files and say, I want you to perform the role of a financial analyst and reservoir engineer and land team, evaluating, the key points. And here are the things that I'm looking for. And I've got, probably 12 prompts that are in a template of things that I've written and refined over the last 18 months, that I just apply again and again and again. And then because the tools have gotten, a higher level of tokenization and memory, they actually start developing a relationship with you, which is kind of an uncanny valley feeling. But I do think it becomes that like little piece of a tool that just makes you a little bit faster. If you want to summarize an investment banking presentation or deck, that might have taken me 20 minutes to do, and then put an email together with that. I mean, it's a 40-second exercise and then a 5-minute edit. Those are the places that, like, I think the opportunity is, of like just kind of this, like, the energy sector feels like, of the three components of AI that I put in this, like chips, code, and energy are the three components of AI. You listen to NVIDIA, you listen to Meta, you listen to Google, Microsoft, OpenAI, XAI. Like, they're all applying these tools to make their base business better, build better chips, manufacture faster, be in the position of doing things better and faster. Those are the things that I think are interesting. And I don't see that in the energy industry. I actually use Andrew Meister's tool, Tadata, to go through all the 140 transcripts that he has and ask that question of, like, how many times do you hear AI, agentic learning, machine learning actually come out of a conference call? Other than Chevron's $400 million investment in the in actually building power plants for AI,
Side, yep.
on the power side, it just didn't exist. Like, it just doesn't come up. And then you apply that on the tech side, just the Mag 7, and it is like, literally over the last 8 quarters, there's hundreds and hundreds of references of how it's being deployed. And in those three components, energy is the one that I think is more capital intensive, and probably has some of the best opportunities in our entire sector. Utilities, power, oil and gas, feel like they're not building, racing, and scaling like they could be. So that's why I wanted to get on here and just kind of preach a little bit of, like, just apply a little bit of time and energy and encourage your people to do that. And I think there will be a massive opportunity to differentiate, as individuals, and then as companies, as a whole.
Well, I think it's certainly coming, right? So if we believe right now that AI is somewhat of an infinite market, right, which at this point, I think that's pretty apparent, which is the largest companies on the planet are not slowing down any sort of investment. They're investing more, and the number of minutes that anyone is spending, like, I think the stat was, I think average ChatGPT use daily for the average user is like something like 22 minutes. Do you think 2 years from now that your average use of any AI tool is going to be about 22 minutes? Like, it's very apparent that it's going to be a lot larger than that. In fact, it's probably going to very closely approach the number of minutes you're in front of a screen. So if you're in front of a phone, you're in front of a desktop, you sort of think about that screen time will become AI native in some capacity. Now, some of that will be like sort of still rotting on the couch, looking at, Instagram reels or TikTok or whatever it is that people do to sort of entertain themselves. But the productive hours are going to become AI native, or they're going to start approaching AI native. So AI is sort of this infinite market. That's pretty much apparently seen from these big companies that are investing insane amounts of capital. Now, adjacent to that, that means that chips and digital infrastructure should be an infinite market. That's very clearly happening too, because the largest private investments are going into digital infrastructure, and the largest private investments are going into powering that digital infrastructure and chips. And that's why NVIDIA is, where it is in terms of valuation. Okay. If that's true, that should imply that energy, and specifically power, should also become an infinite market, right? Because in order to power those two things that I just described, we're going to need an abundant amount of energy. Now, that narrative has been shared. The narrative around saying there's going to be an insane amount of nat gas demand, an insane amount of power demand, an insane amount of energy demand is very clear, because that sounds really good in terms of like, sort of a conference call reason to be bullish. Yes. Okay, that's true. Now, what is the second order impact of that? Well, there's an extreme amount of demand, which means at some point or another, maybe we should see a price signal. But that price signal also means we need a lot more resources. So that means that over time, we need to develop energy better, faster, stronger. If that is the bottleneck for super intelligence, which the largest companies on the planet, the largest governments on the planet are looking to invest in, and energy is somehow that bottleneck, that means we're going to need a lot more of it. And right now, every single AI research lab, every single big tech company is leveraging AI in order to get better. Those companies they force their engineers and their researchers to use these tools all day, every day to do their job better. NVIDIA has an army of agents that work 24/7 in order for them to do research on how they should develop the next generation of chips. That accelerates their speed to market on developing the next sort of version. And so, I think the question we ask is, where is that currently in the energy space? Where is it in the oil and gas space? Where is it in the renewable space? Where is it in any sort of carbon reduction space? Those things are still very early, right? There's going to be a giant market for this. There should be, in theory, hundreds of startups spending time at this intersection, because there's hundreds of startups spending time at the intersection for the other two markets I described. And if this is the bottleneck in order for us to get better AI, we have a problem, right? Because this is ultimately a flywheel, right? AI is using AI to build better AI, great, which requires better chips. Those companies are using AI to build better chips, which need more power. Where is the AI to develop more power? And ultimately, that's a bottleneck to us having, better AI or super intelligence. And I think that's becoming somewhat more and more understood. And so I think that's the broad macro here.
I think that's a fair, I don't like the F word, but I do think that's an accurate reaction in and around like where the sector is. And the question is that, is that finding more resource? Is that cheaper resource? Is that refining? There's a lot of time and energy being put into better reliability, better load factor management in electric grids that are, programmable, and the capacity factors on every power line are underrated relative to the peak capacity utilization, and you're avoiding fires, and therefore you have free capacity on transmission. You have ability to optimize systems around that. And I do think AI is working through that. But what I think is kind of compounding and interesting about what you said in this flywheel, as you think about individuals, every day that I spend, and I'm spending a disproportionate amount of time, I believe, versus peers, working through and trying to apply tools, and then, specially built tools for the things that I'm doing are really where I'm looking. And I'm using AI to guide me to where those tools are, candidly. And it's a very interesting do loop of kind of building and framing that, understanding of how to use intelligence. And I think about this, and I always thought about business as like, treat your business like a professional sports team, and like keep your best players on the field, and like build, are you building a strong link business or a weak link business? Strong link is like NBA basketball. You can have two great players and win championships. Congratulations to the Oklahoma City Thunder. Big fan. Just getting that in, given I know you're in Oklahoma City.
It's been a great couple of weeks in Oklahoma City, David.
Yeah. And then, so that's a strong link sport. But like a weak link sport is soccer. Like you could have the best, and Messi, but you got to get the ball from from goalie to backfield through the midfield and on his foot, so he can then score. That's a weak link business. But in this professional sports team analogy, like you can actually use these tools to actually elevate your game, and even if it's only on that fraction, like that 0.5%, a little bit better that you get each day, you really can bring a major league ball club to AA ball, which is what I've tried to do in the past with, on the research side and on the banking side. And we're trying to do that at WhiteHawk now, where it's like we can outcompete and win. And that's the framing. Like, it's like, how do you do that? and really that's kind of where these tools are going to lead you. The other factor is like legacy businesses that are kind of stuck, a lot of big finance groups, treasury groups, banking groups, you're not allowed to use these tools, like because of, are you actually violating any confidentiality? Are you actually going,
Compliance
are the
concern,
tools going to,
security concern. Yeah,
compliance
mandatory. Yeah.
exactly. Are the tools going to use your information? Like 100%, I am a product for ChatGPT, XAI,
100%.
Gemini. Like I'm helping them get better. Like there's no doubt about it. I
I
know
mean, the
that
same
I will
argument's
become the
true of
product in
Google,
the
though,
future.
right? Like,
Yeah.
like at some point you cross the chasm of saying this is so obvious that we need to use this that, like you're willing to tolerate some degree of risk. No decision here in a corporate environment comes without some version of risk. The risk we're talking about here is kind of minute, right? It just, from my perspective, let's sort of play this out. The analogy I love is we have discovered a brand new continent of English speaking PhDs that will work for close to free. And so, on the question of what does it mean for energy, is to say, okay, great, there's this unlimited labor force effectively available to you. If you gave let's just say, particularly upstream oil and gas, if I gave every US independent an army of interns for every senior executive, for every vice president sitting underneath that, and for, let's say, every staff level engineer, and I ignored everybody else, and I'm just talking about the office, would you not be able to get things done better and faster and cheaper? And the answer is almost unequivocally yes, because there's some degree of productivity of things that you would do that would move you closer to the goal line of whatever you're trying to accomplish if I gave you free labor. Now, if I specialize that free labor and it works 24/7 on demand, what does that mean, right? And so I think all paths sort of lead, if we talk about that loop that I described, to developing more resource at a lower cost. So it's sort of antithetical to the resource hierarchy, right? It's kind of
so interesting. Yeah. Like there's two thoughts that pop into my head simultaneously, and I'm going to try to not lose our audience, but one is you listen to the CEO of Google. They've got 10,000 engineers, and AI is making their existing workforce at least 10% more efficient.
100%.
It's 1,000 engineers. Like that's more engineers than most energy companies employ in total, and they're just 10% more efficient today. Always remember this: the AI tool you're using today is the worst one you will ever use in your life. Like it will be better tomorrow, and then it'll be better again. And if you're using it, you will just continue to exceed, and people won't catch you. The counterpoint to that is, I don't know if you've ever heard that there's a study on how information impacts investment decisions. It was a 1974 study by Paul Slovic on information and decision making. Have you ever heard about it?
No.
And so this was an interesting case study of he took 8 professional horse handicappers and asked the question of, I want you to predict and understand how you predict the winners of races. And so in round 1, he asked all 8 of them, what 5 pieces of information would you want? And each one had different information. Like, I want to know how many races that jockey has ridden on this horse. What's the weather? What's the weight? Like different factors. Like these information is, and there happened to be 10 horses in each race. So like blind chance, if you and I went out there, we'd get 10% correct. And so round 1, 5 pieces of information, they got a 17% accuracy, which is actually remarkable, like being that much better than blind luck. And then he asked a second question that's the most important part. What's your confidence in your prediction? And they were 19% confident. And so their accuracy and their confidence, like the size of the bet they would place, was actually right. So the information, 5 pieces, gave them a relatively aligned accuracy and confidence. Round 2 gave them 10 pieces of information. Round 3 gave them 20. And in round 4 gave them 40 pieces of information. What was so telling about getting more information, which is what AI is doing. AI is like effectively the entire world of information is now available to you if you ask the right questions, and that you get in the right tools that have subject matter expertise. So you have all the information in the world. the issue with these 8 professional horse handicappers were, with more and more information, their accuracy stayed at 17%. But what do you think their confidence did?
So went even lower. Or do you think
No,
went
their
higher?
confidence went to 35%.
Okay.
So their willingness of, I've got now 40 pieces of information, I've got
It just
8
makes it
times the
greater
amount.
to
I
make
should
that. Yeah.
it, and so then they made bets that were way larger than what they should have relative to their confidence.
Yeah.
And so there's this like interesting, case study of like, as you use these tools, like, are you actually asking the questions to confirm and not confirm? Because additional information, we have a confirmation bias in human
Yeah.
nature, and
100%.
these tools are sycophantic. Like, they're 100% wanting to make you happy and lead down that path. But additional information that conflicts with what our predetermined bias was, we tend to discount and ignore. And these tools, I think, are almost resulting in that same, they confirm, we attach, and we, like, as we get more information that confirms our outcome, our confidence goes up, just like those 8 professional horse pickers did. And we end up having this confirmation bias. And so there's this like interesting set of prompts that I've been using, which is like, ask the confirmation and ask the alternative, and like actually go through and build the tool where it's almost like a consultant that is, one that's playing, the
Yes.
good cop and one that's playing the bad cop around any decision, and steel manning through those. But I think there is this like interesting, kind of case study back to 1974 that people should read, this Paul Slovic study. And we used it a lot because, in the investing world, there's always this, you get an MBA and a business degree, more information is better. Like, you can form your opinion of the world better if you have more information. And sadly, I don't actually believe that makes you right. I
No, I
always
don't think it
think it's
does.
interesting.
I think there is, it's interesting, right? Like it depends what you're solving for. If your opinion is you want to solve for trying to make the best decision possible with the information available, that's a very different exercise than the point you brought up, which is confirmation bias. And I would make the argument that in most of what happens in the resource industry, there is a decision that is made, and most things need to sort of just generate analysis that confirms that viewpoint. And the entire ecosystem is sort of structured around that, whether that's the investment side of it, whether that's the banking side of it, or whether that's the corp dev and the executive and the board side of it. And so I'd love to believe that everyone's, sort of a rational actor, but I think there's been enough to suggest that that's not true. Most people just make the decision and are looking for some sort of reinforcement of that. Well, if that's true, and ultimately I'm telling you there's a criterion that is higher order than that, which is you need abundance. And so that means my speed to making that decision and to sort of conducting that transaction. And, if the decision is I want to move rigs on, I need to move that faster. If that is the argument, these tools are incredibly helpful in sort of speeding that up. But I also think there's another element to this, which is I think you sort of need to bucket the world into 2 different tasks. And one is a black and white area, and one is a gray area. And I think 90% of things sit in the gray area. So the black and white area is, do I have something where I have an extremely clear idea of what is right and what is wrong? And so what is right and what is wrong is, a great example of this is chess. And so for when we originally got computers involved in chess, there was a period of time where a human plus the computer would beat the computer alone. But then that was a temporary phenomena. Then the computer just got better. And now, like, you can take a world champion like Magnus Carlsen or whatever, and like, he can't beat an iPhone because, like, it is just a game in which there is a right answer and there is a wrong answer. And the human is far more likely to make the wrong answer than the computer is in this particular example. In corporate decision making, that requires some level of human judgment, like 99% of the value is not working off of perfect information on what is right and what is wrong. 99% of the time requires a lot of human judgment. Maybe not the total number of tasks might not be 99%, but the value is sitting in that sort of gray. And so what does that mean is we should sort of really deeply focus on the intersection between where is there human judgment and where can AI sort of help uh, the human make a better decision, right? Like, which is what you described, right? How do you get more information? How do you increase the confidence level? How do you find the pitfalls? How do you sort of help human judgment? How do you have 1,000 people to bounce ideas off of when making your decision, and then make your decision faster because there was no bottleneck to getting the information that you were waiting on, right? Um, I
Yeah.
think that's where I'm spending an insane amount of time, right? Is
Yeah. I think
human bluffing.
the agent, yeah, I think that's where, um, again, I just keep thinking about it, like, if you're getting results that you want, like, keep doing that. Like, so this is, but in those like little nuances of like, man, that task, converting from PhD to Aries, that took me, and then tying every line, like that took too long. Well, if you could figure out a way to automate that, is there a process that would save you and multiply, not just on that task, but everything else? And it kind of reminds me again of this table stakes analogy of like in the 90s and 2000s, like really knowing how to cut, paste, use Excel. Like that was the financing world. Like you get into data management, drilling info comes out, we're doing type curves, we're building stacks of 3P potential, understanding, type resources, and then shale, and then oil shales, and then inventory. And that was kind of the game. Then it became macro driven, doing your own programming, kind of being able to pull information. Like that was the 2010s of like kind of the world of, culling more and more together. Now I think you're right. Like it is this like ability to build that little agent for the smallest sliver of a task, and then go down the path of, do that again and again, and make yourself more efficient. But you got to have the willingness to invest the time to really, most of those times it's not going to be that value added. And it's this interesting thing. Like if you want to learn how to use these tools, there's a Rudyard Kipling quote that I maybe I'm being too esoteric, but like, if you didn't get what you want, it's a sign that you, one, didn't really want it, or you tried to bargain over the price. And bargaining over the price, maybe time invested, maybe money invested. There are two. Really, time is the most valuable thing we have. But like, you either didn't really want to do it, or you're trying to bargain. There's another quote by Amelia Earhart that's like, the most difficult thing is the decision to act, and then the rest is merely tenacity. I find many people fail on a lack of tenacity. It's like, I say I want to work out every day. I want to be thinner. Like I don't want to, it's this like tenacity and attention to tenacity is like, it's dangerous because, you can get, a little too captured by achievement or achieving goals, and like close to obstinate focus towards those goals or achievements. Like there is this, like, that might not be the right outcome. But it then gets back into my first statement. Like, if you're not getting the results you want, then change. Like, do something different. Keep pivoting. Like there is a degree of like, if you really want something, it's a sign that you want it, and just keep working towards that with tenacity. And that's where deploying these tools and kind of using them and thinking about it can make the energy sector and really your life just better. And so it's this interesting, like, we're getting a little, maybe getting a little philosophical in lessons, but I don't think there's a way to spend too little time trying to learn and improve yourself. Like that's probably the message to anybody going, like, you're going to college. There's a degree of, you go to college mainly because it signals to the world that you have the tenacity to go to do something for a certain amount of time and come out with an outcome. Two of my kids are going into engineering. One's going into business. I tend to think engineering, teaches you a framework of how to think. The only other degree that teaches you that is law, where it's like framing of how to solve problems, how to communicate, how to think. I think business is like sales. Like, how do you sell yourself? How do you develop
100%.
relationships? Like, what's your individual network? And Raj, you do a great job at that. By the way, I do think that is a like that kind of network, and like selling yourself, like building those relationships, framing how to think, really that's what these tools are. They can be a cyborg on your shoulder that can help you. If you already know how to think through something, they will just make you better at kind of drilling through and asking yourself the right questions, and then just getting better.
Well, on a long enough time
Yeah, so we
horizon, I
kind of
think
went
it
down that
helps
path. Yeah.
deliver utility, right? So it's like if you're an individual who leverages this, you're going to generate more productivity. That productivity, in theory, should generate utility to your fellow human, right? Like, and that like is a very positive thing, right? I think that's like the same argument um, around. So there's all these reports of like AI researchers getting poached, and Meta spending hundreds of millions of dollars. Like in fact, like I think it's like $100 million 1 year compensation package. Like the highest has been like $300 million. I think they tried to buy like a 10-person startup for $15 billion. Like there's these crazy numbers. They sound crazy, okay? But if you sort of think through this for a moment, an AI researcher is an asymmetric upside bet, which is like very clear that current AI systems generate an extreme amount of ROI to the planet. And so if you can hire the right AI researcher and they come up with any sort of breakthrough, let's say one individual won't get there, but a portfolio of those individuals, there's a power law, right? If one of those can sort of crack the nut on developing that product then scales. And if you have distribution, it's interesting. So I try to think about that same concept in our industry. And so I think, what is the largest sort of asymmetric upside bet of what happens in an energy business? Let's say very specifically an upstream or midstream public co, or let's say even a private equity fund. It is that you got some sort of very interesting M&A deal off, that you saw some opportunity and that someone else missed, or you found some amazing amount of exploration. Hence why those two individuals, if very good, are always chased after from a recruiting and a hiring perspective, and any elements associated with exploration or any elements associated with large scale A&D or M&A, there's a lot of fees involved and banks and this and that, and no one cares because the outcome can be so large. There's a power law potential outcome. Well, that's today, right? Those individuals sort of do the jobs the way humans do. The next evolution is those guys have an army of AI agents to help them do their job. And then the person that actually sits higher value, in theory, above those two individuals is the person who knows how to build those AI agents on behalf of that person and make them superhuman, right? Because the number of people who could do that are incredibly small, but the outcome is huge, right? Like, again, it scales. And it's the exact same analogy as the AI researcher. The AI researcher is going to make the product potentially 100 times better or 10 times better, whatever it is, which then accrues all the value ultimately. But it's not the person who sort of put the front end of that application together for you and I to use. That person's not generating that value. It is the breakthrough that generates the value. And I think it's the same concept here, is like, how can I scale the M&A guy, right? So if I have like, here's a very concrete example. If I sit behind your shoulder for 2 hours and watch you read a 150-page management deck, and I to a point where it's awkward. And like I say, Dave, you got to tell me every single thought that comes to your mind, good, bad, indifferent, whatever. Every single thing. I'm going to take that and I'm going to generate a giant system prompt. And then I'm going to sit that. And now I have, give me a couple of days. I now have a Dave AI management deck buy-side first pass review. Now imagine I do that with 10 guys. Now I have this virtual investment committee to screen every single deal that comes across my desk. And it's very mentally taxing to read through that. And particularly when we're at a stage of our career where we're in meetings all day or on the road, or like, wife, kids, whatever it is, that prevent you from just sitting and doing deep thinking for 3 hours in a row. Like, it's just not a common thing to do anymore. You're not an analyst. And so, if I can do that on steroids, what is that worth relative to one M&A individual that doesn't know how to do these things? Now, today, I would say there's a large gap, right? Like, potentially, where I could do a first pass screening with a myriad of AI tools. I don't have to hire a bunch of consultants. I don't have to hire a bunch of buy-side advisors. In fact, I get 10 buy-side advisors, and I can do that all in 24 hours of a deal hitting my desk, right? Now, today, that's a secret. Today, that's a novelty. Tomorrow, whatever tomorrow looks like, is that 6 months, is that a year, or is that 2 years? It becomes table stakes. And so the range in between is, how do you build that today such that whenever it is table stakes, you've compounded to a level where no one can catch up, because these things are stacking on top of each other, right? It's not like, okay, we build this thing and then we stop. It's like, no, this is my V1. So by the time my competitor catches up to the V1, I'm on V85. And
Yeah,
V85 generates far more value.
let me see if I can repeat this back to you, because I think what you just said is probably one of the things we've spent dozens of hours talking about. Like you said, every other week we talk for an hour and a half, and then kind of like, so if you're an M&A expert, like let's just say you really are inside a bank, you're the best geologist, best reservoir engineer, you're in a private equity shop.
Let's create a
Inside of your
distinction
business
between the evaluator and the relationship guy, because to be clear, the relationship guy, there's no way to really agentically do that outside of idea generation of who to reach out to, let's say, or first draft email, like personalized emails or something like that. So
trust. We're still in a world where individual trust matters dramatically. Like probably a superpower at WhiteHawk is so we're an alternate investment manager, up and running very well in our minerals business, ran a special situations fund, and now have a public company that we've taken private. So we've got kind of two investments. I'm working on a carbon strategy, working on a non-op strategy, and then a potential operated strategy. So there might be 5 parts of our business,
and a buyout of public
two
companies,
of them.
Most recently.
No, I mean that was the PHX Minerals deal was a long dated process of working to create value, and now we have an Oklahoma City office, and I'm not as closely associated with it, but the people sound great, and like they're fired up because we're a company that like gets things done. Where I was going with that is like those relationships and that trust is something that our investors have, and we close deals. So that's the name any named investment banker that you can think of that has great relationships. You can't do that with AI. You can't have that individual trust is something that management teams, bankers, boards all look towards, and is very valuable. Now let's drill down the level to the person that's doing the evaluation, the engineering. That like I think the hard part is you've got to use these tools. You have to ask yourself the question: what are my first principles in doing the job I do, and what are the heuristics that I use to evaluate something? I've got 20 years of finance, banking research. Now, I guess 5 years of carbon capture, a year of 7, 8 years of engineering at Shell. And so there were heuristics in each of those components of like, how do you make decisions? And it's like drilling down in your own mind of what are the questions and the things and the tasks that I'm doing that can be identified and used with these tools. Like, and that really is some deep thinking. Like it is. Mm-hmm. And then what are the heuristics that your peers are using? So like we've got a reservoir engineer that I'm building a relationship with now who's phenomenal. I've got our land team that she's great. Like our finance people are incredible. But like how do they think is not necessarily the same. And so it's like this interesting kind of process of like truly what are the things that our investors want? What are the things that we do well? And then what are those, those metrics or measurements or questions that we always ask to then be able to get to the best investment and the best outcome. And that is where these tools are phenomenal.
100%.
And I don't know how to describe, like it is like it's an unlock that if you think that way of like, what are the tasks that I am using in my own workflow? There are parts of it that, like I said, I took a research paper from an investment bank that was on biotech. I was just curious. I was like, know nothing. 140-page research deck from Stiefel, on longevity. Peter Attia is doing all this stuff that's interesting. Great book called Outlive. Like, if you want to try to figure out like mental health, physical health, like it's worth reading. Piled those two together, uploaded in, and then built a Q&A tool for myself that I ask it questions of like, here's where I'm feeling. This is the exercise routine that I'm interested in. You know, what should I be thinking about?
And
And
it's
it
much
will
cheaper than
legitimately,
hiring
it's
him
my
for
own
two hundred
advisor.
fifty thousand dollars, which is not available to you, right? Like it's just not a
Yeah,
reasonable.
exactly.
Like you
No,
cannot hire
I
him as
spent
a doctor, right? Like that's just not a
no
thing. So the reason why he wrote the book,
exactly.
right, is to sort of
Yeah,
give out a
it's a
a diluted down version of what he's thinking and how he thinks about the world and what his recommendations are, which is incredibly valuable. It is a it's personalized ish
no, it is.
care, right?
Exactly. And that's where I use that other, I put medicine in the LinkedIn post because it's just this thing that is in kind of your personal use case. And I'm trying to like lead people in a different direction of like, maybe it isn't the tool just for your work, but like it is this interesting opportunity. And it's like 75 grand to hire Peter Tia to, go to Austin and do that. But like you can't, it's not worth it. Like, or you can spend $2,500 on a program, or you can just listen
Yeah,
to his
yeah. Like
podcast, or you can read his book. But like there's like that information is available, and you can build kind of
100%.
a an opportunity set. And like, so once you do those heuristics in the job you do, you then have kind of a mimicking of yourself. And then as you apply those tools on specific tasks, given the tokenization and like the expansion of memory in each system. I'm trying to remember, Grok is like at 1 million per user, and ChatGPT is like 250,000, I think.
That's right.
Once you do that, like, and those tokens they're like series of letters. They're not individual letters, but it's like this memory system that gets to know you. Then when you're using that specific tool for that specific task, it actually becomes more effective, and it compounds. Like it just builds. And that, like, I don't believe people that aren't using these tools now will ever catch up to me as long as I keep deploying them.
I
And
think
I
that's
don't know how to
right.
say that.
There's a compound effect to this stuff, right? Like there's a compound effect to this stuff.
Yeah.
And so, so long as it looks the way it does and it scales the way it does, that's right. Like it's going to be hard to catch up. Right? I mean, so the memory piece is very interesting that you described, because there's only a handful of like applications that you can use as ChatGPT is one of them. Grok has lighter memory than OpenAI definitely has the best from my anecdotal usage, memory between threads. And that is a very interesting unlock. And because the reason why is the way our stuff works, and the way most AI tools work, is the memory between threads is not there. The user personalization and understanding is not there. I'll give you an example of this. There's that Adam Sandler movie where every day he wakes up and he doesn't have any memory of the prior day. Like he has memory up to a certain point, and then he like just doesn't remember, and then that day is over. And so I think about that as like that's how most of these tools work today, which is actually interesting because once that gets solved, it'll be even more powerful. But like that's like kind of how our concepts work today, which is they know what they know. You add in additional context, that is how the day is going, and then at the end of the day, you hit that context window, and so you're done. And so you have to start a new thread, and when you start a new thread, everything you just went through in the other thread does not carry over. Because again, we're starting the day over, no memory. That's sort of where it is for most of like the enterprise tooling that we're sort of building out. Like that's kind of what we found. Now, there are a lot of solutions to help solve that, and if like that is a temporary phenomena, but that's generally how these things work, which is kind of fascinating. And that's how it even worked with ChatGPT. Let's call it a few months ago. The memory layer,
6 months ago.
Yeah, that's right. And so the memory layer,
I'm trying to remember, was it Claude?
Very unique thing.
Was it Claude that came out with like a template that started pre-predicting things that I would want and felt very uncomfortable? Was that like December? Was that?
Yeah, I mean, look, they're like newest. Yeah, there was a version of their coding platform they released that was almost doing too much, and so there is a barrier between like giving instructions. Like if you told your intern, like if you had an intern, you said, okay, great, go do this job, and then they came back to you and they did even better, like they did more than you asked for, you'd generally be pretty pleased with that. But what you found is like most coders did not like that. Actually, they hated it. But
no, there's the analogy that it was like I was using some tools and I was just testing it out, But like if you gave, you had a 50-page deck that you were putting together for your management, and it's like, I need slide 12, 17, and 35 edited this way, and you wrote it up exactly, and you handed it off to your junior analyst or whoever, and then they came back and like, I made these exact changes to 12, 17, and 35. Like it is exact. But as I was looking at it, like those changes changed both slides 40 and your conclusion a little bit. And I'd be like, I didn't ask you to do that. I don't want you to do that. And like that's what the tool did. It took a step beyond like in an edit of like summarize. I had this long email chain is what I was using it for, like trying
There's
to
some level of
summarize like
permission that we currently want,
yeah,
or guardrails. But
it's
I
interesting.
think that changes over time. Like as you develop trust in capability, I think that changes over time. So, like here's a more like concrete example of where I think these things sort of go, which is if you hired a first year investment banking analyst for every single one of your senior executives, to like they just shadow around whoever that person is, you would unequivocally say at the end of that year, they would pick up understanding how that senior executive thinks about certain things. What do they like? What do they not like? Where is their decision-making framework? Forget about all the human stuff. Just like, honestly, like I know how they would like to see things. I know what they find as a red flag, what's a green flag to them, and their decision-making process. Now, imagine I can do that leveraging an AI agent that could do that, call it 80/20, and it doesn't take a year of training. I can spin that up in a couple of days of shadowing plus sort of like some system prompting, right? And maybe it's not perfect, but I can do that sort of on demand for an organization. And now, anytime we have major decision making or a memo or a conflict or whatever, like that memo that gets produced before the meeting that says, here's the issue that we're running into, here's the facts, we can sort of almost get to the next phase of what we need to be thinking about, right? Like here is like now the synthesized bucket list of decision making, and we should spend 80% of our time now on the human judgment side versus the 80% of let me relay you all the facts and let's go through the facts in some sort of biased way, actually, to sort of get to that conclusion in the first place. What a waste, right? What a waste of like precious time that we could be spending on the human judgment piece. That's just one example, right, of something that I think is actually like level 2, right? We've talked about level 1, which is, every single executive, if they had an army of interns, would ask for an intelligence briefing in advance of every meeting they have, particularly external meetings, but internal meetings also, right? That should be an obvious thing. And today, like, you don't have that army of interns. You don't have enough executive assistants to provide that briefing in advance of that meeting. Tomorrow we do, because we've sort of made it agentic. And in that sense, I think these things are labor, right? In the same way, like,
Yeah. No,
we've done,
it's like every
yeah.
yep. Now every time you go, like I bet every executive, let's just say you're meeting with your finance team and they gave you a quarterly update for whatever division you happen to be going to, and you got another one coming up. Probably the minimum you do is you look at the last presentation they gave you, and so you refresh on, here are the things that they covered last time, so I know, and here are my notes that I took on that last time. Maybe you go to that level. Maybe you go back 2, and like here's the, like, imagine, as opposed to having to spend that time flipping through the 30 pages they had last time for you to refresh, you just clicked a button and it gave you the refresh thought in a
100%.
snap. Like that's like a very simple, like these tools are great at doing that.
Yeah,
Like
100%.
phenomenal. Like there's a research piece that I think Kimmeridge put out. It was like 30 or 40 pages. I had it summarize the research piece, and then I read the research piece without reading the summary. And then I wrote out my summary of like what I thought the key points were. And then I applied it to our business. We've got a big, Appalachian gas asset. And so it's like, okay, from a mineral standpoint and gas demand, what does this mean? And then I went back to the tool, and like it was 90% what I probably would have looked at. Like it got
Right.
the right points. Like it had a few things that were not exactly what I wanted. Missed a couple things, but like that And
So would your, like two,
intern. That's my
an
point. Like
intern,
that's
or like, let's say you hired an analyst that worked 2 years at Goldman Sachs and you paid him an inordinate amount of money. And quite frankly, it'd be really hard to retain that talent, right? Like that person's still going to make some degree of mistakes. And so I think, this concept of like, it needs to be perfect, as a reason not to
no.
use it
That's
at
my
all
point. Like
is
the
quite
fact that
silly.
it's 90%. This was probably December, maybe even late, sometime in the fourth quarter that they had this out. So I bet if I did the same thing now, the tool would be, particularly ChatGPT, would be better because I've framed, kind of what it knows about me is more. But there is this interesting thing that, again, the cumulative value of using information and consuming information and getting the right information to you at the right time is what you were just saying. Like before a meeting, wouldn't it be great to know? I'd spend a lot of time whenever you're meeting with 12 investors and who's on my agenda. Like, okay, what did I talk to them about last? I mean, we had hundreds and hundreds of clients, and it took a lot of time and energy. And our sales force really managed that, and they would give me the guidance as well of what have they been thinking very recently. That can be agentic, like that can be managed. Like it's just that is where the world will come, and that'll make you just a little bit smarter as a treasurer, CFO, CEO, operations manager, like just kind of knowing. And then you'll be more relatable too, because like you will automatically know what the person was thinking very quickly, so you never miss the opportunity to remember what they presented to you last quarter or a year ago. Like I tend to think quarter over quarter and year on year. Maybe that's the finance in me. But like if you could go back a year and if you could go back a quarter and remember before a meeting with 12 people that are presenting to you what those people were telling you then, these tools can do that, like 100% guaranteed. You got an investment banking deck from a year ago and you've got one today, it'll compare and contrast it in a heartbeat. It's There's just like the language side is very powerful. And then the
100%.
second thing is the prompting world. Like the companies are building interfaces to take, what did you say, 22 minutes of usage a day, up to like the internet. Like we use the internet all day long. Like
Correct.
Google Glasses, like there's a demo of like you put them on and they will auto subtitle a translation for you. So like anytime you're walking into Home Depot and someone's speaking Spanish in Houston, like you can click a button and like automatically know what they're saying if you don't speak Spanish, and it'll be like your subtitles on any video. Like if you're walking and trying to figure out directions in a city like New Orleans that's curved with the river and you've never been there because it isn't gridded out like Oklahoma City is,
Yeah.
like you can just it'll map you, and
Well,
like the
the
same
form factor,
visualization of turn here and turn there. Like the form factor is going to change, and
the
then
form factor is
but
going to
that's
change,
AI
right?
agents
Yeah.
working for you,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
that's where I'm going with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like and
That's
then
right.
but understanding the underlying prompt that the tool is using to fit into that form factor, and working with these tools now of like every one of them has an underlying set of prompts that are built into the system today to get you to an outcome that makes you want to keep using them. And as you use them, you'll start understanding what those prompts are. I don't know, maybe you could talk about this a little
Yeah.
bit,
Yeah.
Raj,
Yeah.
because I
Look,
think as you're building out the tools, it might be something that'd be interesting to people, because like framing how your relationship with the tool is working is different because of knowing how they're, either it's the reinforcement learning with direct human feedback or the tool training on itself. But there is an underlying prompt in every tool
yep.
that
Well,
that I think
I
is
think some of
useful
this is a
concept.
little counterintuitive. Okay, so I think if you like look at popular narrative, I think if you think like I think most people think, oh, this will help junior guys get more work done. Okay, great. Like that's sort of the general narrative. And I actually have a very completely different take on this, which is like we can spend a lot of time automating a lot of that work and making it better. But like let's go back to the road example I gave you, which is if I can give you an intelligence briefing in front of the decision makers, that make them 1% better in every meeting, there's a power law to that, which is, okay, you get 300 or 500 of these a year. How many of them do you actually skim through? I don't know, a very small number. But if you're better in 2 or 3 of those meetings, your entire executive team is, or your board is, there's probably some very large scale decision that had an outsized amount of impact that you made a better decision on. And so that probably outweighs all the value of automating some rote task that, 4 or 5 engineers were like, dude, this is just like really boring. I don't want to do this. And so I think a lot of energy and time gets spent there. And like, it's very complicated. It's very difficult to actually do that 100% or 80% or 90%. Whereas the other one is like so obvious and so low hanging fruit. And so while that's the popular narrative, the number of senior guys that I've talked to, like, whether it's C-suite or whether it's managing directors or whether it's private equity fund heads, that have said the same thing to me privately, that are more or less like, I need to learn how to use this insanely well because it has an insane amount of leverage for me if I know how to use this stuff. And I think that's true. I think that's wholly true, right? Because at the end of the day, like, this is all a function of large scale decision making and capital flows. And so you sort of need to arm the people who make the large scale decision making and the large scale capital flows with these sorts of things. And that is generally not automating something that gets done already. It's automating some new activity that if they had an army of people that had resources, they would do, but they don't have that. They're already resource constrained, right? Like, I've yet to meet a lot of senior guys that say there are 15 things I'd love to get done, but they're getting done already. Like that's not true. It's like there are 15 things that I'd love to get done, but I don't have the bandwidth or the people to do it. So like, they just get rejected, right? And so like, and you can debate whether or not they should have those things, which is that's where we've historically been at. Is like, don't send the junior guy the request to do something at 9:30 p.m. That sounds like nice in theory, and like I'm sure I'm going to catch a lot of heat around that. But like, and like put aside the fact that 10 years ago that weren't the case. Like 9:30, it doesn't matter what time it is. Like that request needed to be done. The reality is like, are we better off with those requests being done? As an organization, are we going to make better decisions? Is the time trade-off of that junior person doing work from 9:30 to midnight and sending it to a CEO who's going to review it before their 6 a.m. call or breakfast, what's at somewhere where they're trying to like lead to some decision making? Is that beneficial? And the answer is yeah, it's probably beneficial. Maybe that individual one is not ROI positive, but if you do 300 of those, it certainly is. So, if it's not getting done today, it should be done. And AI, sort of agents or whatever, like the sort of blanket term we're using, enable you to go do that and set that sort of automation up very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And for effectively free, or as close to free as possible.
I think that the power law, like management, the best people in companies are playing a strong link sport. And again, strongest link is like there's a few key people that if you can make them better, that top 1%, the $100 million person, the explorationist that discovered something, like you've all met, like, and you know who those people are, and it's not always your C-suite. Like, but if you can figure out a way to, like you said, in the 300 days they work a year, just improve them a little bit, that compounds, and that's where the opportunity set is. And then there's the smaller compounding. We've talked about this a lot of, you're going to replace the junior workforce.
100%.
I was like, well, maybe, like possibly. But there's also like
workforce can
probably at a window of
10 times the amount of work, right?
10 times the work.
Yeah.
That's the Googleism. Like Google isn't firing, the 1,000 engineers because they're 10% better. They're getting 11,000 engineers of work out of 10,000 engineers today.
Well, how else are you going to reduce cost, right? Like, if we need more resources, and we need those resources to be abundant, and we need to reduce the cost of finding and extracting those resources, let's say very specifically on oil and gas, finding and extracting natural gas, let's say, that means same number of people, more output, right? Like I produce more nat gas, let's say in a very, prime example for a natural gas company, with the same number of people. How do we do that? How is that human? Like if today the leverage of scale has been human talent, and human talent costs X, the future state is, in the same way we have a recruiting and an HR department that manage talent, we will have a AI department. We will have a chief AI strategy person, and they will be a strategist, but they will also be a manager of AI talent, in the same way that you have some, equivalent of someone who is managing and recruiting really good talent. And
Well,
so,
I think the other, like the decision making, like if you're making a massive like if you improve your capital allocation just a little bit, because this is a capital intensive industry, it's not really a labor industry. So like whenever you frame that decision making, concept of like, if you're evaluating 100 deals a year and you do one, but that one is slightly better, or you do two. Like let's just say you double your capacity, where you get two deals done. Like you frequently hear this comment of like, I don't understand why this isn't happening. Like that, why are energy stocks underperforming? Like I don't understand. Like you read on Twitter, it's like, man, oil. Why is oil going down? Like, and all that is like the information framing of all the experts are wrong, and their explanation for the world is wrong. Not that the market is wrong. And so, like, whenever you read any trend is happening and any of the experts are saying something like, why is this happening and that should be doing this, like, that trend is going to continue. Like, that's just a lesson in expertise where the macro framing of the information they processed to explain the world was wrong. What I can tell you in the AI world and in energy in particular is the frontier of value creation is like making your capital allocation decision just a little bit better. And it's not on every 300. It's like it's this cumulative compounding effect that then happens, day in, day out, quarter in, quarter out. And you'll ask better questions. You'll have better answers. You'll frame things just a little bit better. And like that little bit better is really where I think the opportunity is. And I don't, I mean, it's a simple world. Like it's what's your cost to find, develop, and produce, energy, and that's all we're solving for. And then what's your reliability factor around that energy? And it's got to be 99 with three nines. And so that means
Mhm.
minutes of downtime. And then there's this like fundamental question of like, if you're feeding this unlimited future demand for intelligence, like why wouldn't intelligence compound? Why wouldn't knowledge consumption compound? Why wouldn't that continue? You're having the largest companies in the world spending billions of dollars around this exponential compounding. It's an existential
100%.
risk and existence for each of these companies. Like they see it as existential. Zuck's probably in his 40s. He's got 20
100%.
years of time frame. Like they're like it, and so like they see it as existential. Like they will not survive if they don't have these tools and the capacity to do these things in and around the world.
It's not
I
just the
never hear
companies who
that
find it
from
existential, by
energy.
the way, either, right? Like you sort of take it more like sort of global macro. China has a couple of companies that have
Yeah,
released open
governments.
source
Sure.
models. Those are more or less funded by their government, and they are building an insane amount of energy capacity and an insane amount of digital infrastructure to support those models. And they've given them away. They've given them away, which is not something many U.S. companies have done. Outside of Zuck and Facebook and Meta, and so there's an arms race for super intelligence. And to me, right now, one of the biggest bottlenecks is going to be energy. I think that narrative has been understood. Now the question is, what are we going to do about it? So part of that is like, okay, are we going to get into the power business? Okay, great, but like, maybe not every energy company is going to get into the power business. But every energy company is going to get into the AI workflow business. That much is obvious because every other industry is going to get in the AI workflow business. And those are
Yeah,
industries
you've
that
been
may not
drug
even
in.
be growing.
Like the three legs of the stool, they have to have energy, they have to have chips, and they are coding. And so,
That's
like,
right.
you are in the AI business. If you have any bit of energy background, you just aren't playing it yet. Like, and I'm not saying you have to be, there's the picks and shovels. Like what you're trying to do is you can sell Levi's jeans to the energy industry, the coal miner or the gold miner equivalent, and build a great business around it. It seems like the guys at Digital Wildcatters might be doing that. My buddy,
Absolutely.
that's doing it in the finance world. Like you don't have to be the actual producer. You can be a service. You can be a niche around it. But like this exponential growth in and around AI, if you're in energy, you're, you're in that business. Like you just
100%.
haven't completely figured it out yet. And if you're not trying to use these tools, if everybody else in that business is trying to deploy these tools to make their business more competitive in an existential race and you're not, shame on you.
Well,
Like
I'm
that's the
sure
way I'd end it. Like
it's already happening, right? Like the early adopters are adopting, and so ultimately this becomes like anything else, right? Which is like it is very clear where this heads. It's like abundantly clear where this heads because of the ROI case. Like this isn't some sort of like socially motivated scenario. This is not some sort of tax scenario like it was like, you know, yeah, I'll give you an analogy of like okay, we need to be carbon neutral or something like that. And there was this like, you know, risk reward trade off of like, do we need to be this? Do we not? Like very clear ROI proposition. Here it's like the ROI is like, is so stupidly obvious that it slaps you in the face upon first demo. Historically, no piece of software has ever done that, by the way. Like enterprise software guys, they'll come in, they have to like make a whole pitch deck about like, here's our case study, and like we saved this operator this much, and if you kind of do this and you're going to share this, and like it's going to take us 8 months to implement. It's like, no, here it's like very easy. Send an email and wait for a memo to come back. Was that not magical? How much time would it have taken a human to do that? Okay, now forget that for a moment. Pop open the screen and use this for a second. By the way, whatever this response is the worst response you're ever going to see in your life. And like that cost is a fraction. The change management is a fraction. Like it is so painfully obvious. And so I think there is this distinction where because it's so painfully obvious, you get to a point where everyone sort of has to adopt like very clearly. And so I think you brought up a good point earlier, which is like if someone's trying to catch up to Dave today, it's going to be really hard because if like unless you like come out of the race, you're going to be compounded so much faster 6 months from now. And so by the time anyone catches up, like you're so far ahead. And I think that's true. Like I think there are, quite frankly, you know, like I've now visited with enough where I know there are people that are extremely invested here. And in fact, they're invested here at a point where they would like to do it very stealthily, because I think there is a true competitive game going on, right? Which is like maybe the story, maybe the narrative that we're talking about is true in many ways. It's like, okay, maybe the energy industry will be a slow adopter here, and maybe there's not enough people spending time at the intersection of energy and AI. I think those things are true. There should be 50 or 100 startups spending time in this market. Maybe they'll all fail, but the market needs to exist. Like I think there's a distinction, right? Which is like it's the same thing with like the shale nat gas business should exist regardless of whether or not the first 50 guys going out and drilling wells fail. Like it was unequivocally a needed market, a good market that delivered more outsized value to either, you know, maybe not shareholders occasionally, but like, you know, to the world. I think the same will be true here. The same will be true here. So, you know, put aside any individual team working on it. I think the market will be there, and maybe
yeah.
we'll
So I
fail on
guess
them.
if you made it an hour and 13 minutes into this rambling discussion and you're interested, drop Raj a note. We'd be happy to talk to individuals. Like I'm curious what the feedback would be, and if you feel like you're leading, lagging, I do think there is this convergence and opportunity. I think Raj, you're doing a lot of service around this. I feel like there's a bit of my job in life right now is mentoring and trying to like show people where I think things are going. I have an ability, luckily, to do that as a person. And so I'm happy to spend the time talking to people about this and spending time with like here examples of a few templates I've built, you know, personally, professionally, that I think could be helpful. But I don't just want to blast it out to the world. Like I candidly think that there are like individuals that are going to be thinking about this. That, you know, if you form kind of loose collections of those people, there's a compounding factor, and you know the random walk of just blasting it on X or LinkedIn isn't the right path. I think there is community around this that is something that in the energy sector we can only do more to make each other better.
And I
And so
think a version
building a
of that
little
will
bit of
happen
community
internally,
around it
right?
is something helpful.
I
Mm-hmm.
think a version of that will happen internally. Today we are in a single player game on AI. Like it's like Dave asks a question, he gets a response back. You know, like I ask a question, I get a response back. Great. What is single player will be more fun multiplayer, right? Like Mario Kart is more fun being
Yeah.
played as like not just you and the computer, but like you versus your friends. Okay, I think the same will happen, and it will certainly happen in an enterprise setting, right? Because so much of what you do is not individual contributor work. In fact, it's immediately collaborative. And so I'm spending a lot of time thinking about that, like how does that work mechanically? But like, it's going to happen. Like, I don't know how long it'll take, but like it will happen that these things become, quite frankly, very collaborative. Um, and whatever you see that is single player today will become multiplayer. Whatever is a one-on-one message will become a thread. Like that is just how these things go. And like that is probably better for productivity as well, right? Why would you want to copy and paste a response and email it to somebody else when they can just be in the chat? And that's kind of like where this heads.
Cool. Raj, thanks for setting this up. Look forward to talking more in a couple of weeks, and have a great 4th of July weekend.
Yeah.
All right.
You too. All right.
Talk to you
Catch you
later.
soon. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.